Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with more hip hop news or hip hop topic. Thinking about the Lil Wayne album that just released, the Carter Six, and thinking about other projects throughout my life. Thinking about how much of a team that you need to be successful, not just in music, but other aspects of life as well. But keeping it generalized to music in general. When people say your team, who are they talking about? In the music game, it's specific to, your producers, your managers, your so-called handlers, your lawyers, the people that you keep around you, the hangers on, so to speak, your label, everything comes into play when it's about success. And one thing that the Carter Six was missing was it felt like a team because we know he had Cortez Bryant and he had Mac Main and he had Birdman and he had Slim and Drake and Nicki Minaj and all these people around him. But it seems like this time around for Carter Six, he didn't have all of those. He had Manny Fresh, which was refreshing to see that he didn't have recently, or in the past for a long time. But as far as having that team around you, surrounding you, it seemed like he didn't have those right pieces or wasn't able to find the right pieces. Not to say they're not good team members or they're not good for him, but it just didn't fit well for that album, or it just for some reason it went awry. But nevertheless, I always felt that Rick Ross had an exceptional team from day one. Being associated with Slip and Slide with Trick Daddy and Trina, and being from that Florida tree, being associated with DJ Khaled, and having these exceptional producers like Cool and Dre and other producers like that. He's always had those pieces around him to help him succeed because we know he has the lyricism, but his ability to work with these producers to have these superb beats and classic beats to these classic hooks. And he's one of the best verse writers that we have seen in hip hop, especially in present day. But Rick Ross always has been business minded and always has been strategic from day one. He's always been clear minded as well. He doesn't consume in a lot of different things. um he smokes his cigars and maybe smokes some trees every now and then and things like that. But nevertheless, he's always been clear minded or clear minded enough to make decisions about his business to keep him staying afloat. And he stood the test of time, uh, opposed to many other artists because there's been a lot of artists that had one good album or had one good song and we never seen them again. Artists that we wish could have had more success. I always talk about the story of Young Jock, who's on Love and Hip Hop Atlanta now. Artists like that. Artists like Mims. The guy who made This Is Why It's Hot. A lot of artists, not just to call those out singly, but a lot of artists that if they had a team around, they could have kept that momentum going. And Rick Ross had that momentum, and he stood the test of time. You know, just example of his beef with 50 Cent. Most people don't come back from that beef unless you're Fat Joe. Uh, I think Fat Joe and Jadakiss were one of the other few ones that did it, but unfortunately, Ja Rule wasn't able to recover from it, and a lot of other artists. But Rick Ross stood the test of time from that, especially with his beef with he had beef with Drake and Trick Daddy and The Game, Birdman, and other artists, and he was able to stand the test of time through those battles. So he's always kept his head up and kept work, kept his head down and kept working, and still was able to withstand those battles, even though there were some formidable foes. But he's true hip hop, and it can't be erased. And I talked about the Pusha T on another segment when he addressed it, Travis Scott, and Pusha T would never say that about Rick Ross because they've had a good working relationship as well with a lot of features together. But they are true MCs and they stay to form. And I believe the game take care of you once you do that. When you stay true to form and you're not pandering or you're not trying to appease demos that are not trying to appease you or trying to embrace you. So when it doesn't happen organically, it doesn't work out all the best for you all the time. So, but Rick Ross has given us that formula for success. So he's talked about working himself out of bad contracts and not having his paperwork right, and he's talked about, not stiffing or cheating his people signed to him like that as well. You know, he's had artists like Wale and Staley, sorry, Wale, Staley, and then he's also had Meek Mills, huge stars and great MCs, but they never once accused him of being stingy or cheating them out of any money or things like that. Now, if it happened, I haven't seen it. I never had seen somebody said Rick Ross cheated them out of money. He said he wants them to have every dime that are owed, and he wants every dime that he's owed. So that's another rare formula that most hip hop CEOs don't have. And he's able to do that because he has faith and confidence in himself to make his own money, opposed to some of these other artists that manage other artists. But he always, and I talked about this before, it's about the necessary elements or having the necessary tools to succeed in hip hop that Rick Ross has that many artists haven't been able to find that formula. And that's, having the production. We talked about the producers, having the lyricism, which he was writing for artists before he became a big artist. And he's been out since '05, I believe, '06. Having the content, just talking about the rags to riches story. He's the closest thing to Biggie we've seen since Biggie. Having that glamour, having the cars, having the big house that's been used in different movies and TV shows and things like that, having the car show that he does, um, having the influence, just being able to talk that boss talk and preach independence and talk about, um, just having that freedom, or the artistic freedom that you can have, and that he's always expressed from day one, writing himself out of bad contracts and bad deals and things like that. And this is the reason he has been so successful for several decades. Um, it and even that CEO scandal that came out that 50 Cent kind of talked about, he was able to withstand that because of his success, because you can overcome scrutiny and adversity if you're performing well. Like, sports players have done that. They're going through some in the news and then they put up 50 points a game or they score 3 touchdowns and all is forgiven. Because if you can, perform well, some things you can overcome, especially if it's not that big of a deal, especially like the CEO scandal, which, it's not like he was locking people up. They were already locked up when they got to him. So it didn't make much sense to me. But now that I think about it, Rick Ross has a better discography than 50 Cent, because 50 Cent has one classic album, which is Get Rich or Die Trying. Of course, The Massacre wasn't a huge album as well, but not to the level of Get Rich or Die Trying. But Rick Ross has been more consistent and he's been more music focused or music generated or music centric than 50 Cent is, especially with 50 Cent doing all the TV shows and things. But, I can argue anybody about 50 Cent having a lesser discography than Rick Ross, because Rick Ross has had classic hits over, couple decades now, opposed to 50. We can only really name two albums and maybe, I want to say, 90% of his discography is on that first album, Get Rich or Die Trying. But Rick Ross, you can go to several albums and pick 2 songs here, 4 songs here, 5 songs here, and being able to put a complete discography together. You can't really do that with 50 Cent. All due respect to 50 Cent, but I believe 50 Cent, Rick Ross is definitely a more diverse and has more of a catalog than 50 Cent does. But nevertheless, um, Rick Ross only had one album that was kind of bad in my opinion. That last album, Richer Than I Ever Been, I wasn't a huge fan of it, even though it had some great production and lyricism on it. But I just think it didn't fit for the sound at the time. But nevertheless, I think he's still a great artist, and he's built a great team around him. And the way he conducts his business should be studied and definitely pay attention to his moves that he'll probably make next. But nevertheless, as always, thank you for tuning into the Urban Scope podcast. And until next time, see you next time.